The Vor Sargent, apparently called knight if the translation provided by Skitters is correct, is the first of the myriad of higher Vor life forms we have encountered. With Skitters' help, I have found out many interesting things. Let's begin with a basic breakdown of the knight's body. Like all Vor life forms, an Earth equivalent can be found in the family of beetles. The knight is an imposing 8 feet on its legs and uses bipedal locomotion to move on the ground. Coupled with the large wings it can fold under its thick carapace, the knight can and does relocate through the battlefield quickly. Its carapace is dense and resilient to munitions smaller than those meant for anti-vehicle operations, making it the first of many life forms the soldiers have dubbed Biotitans, a title I agree with. The knight's carapace is not flexible like its lesser counterparts, but gaps in the joints are soft enough for small arms to puncture its shell. The knight's internals contain many secondary and tertiary redundancies for vital glands and organs, and is the first of the life forms to possess 4 nerve clusters, 2 of which are the basic versions I have found in troopers and drones, and 1 that I have identified as the hive node. The last nerve cluster I discovered was explained by Skitters as a command and control node, allowing the knight to direct the actions of nearby Vor from a lower stratum than itself. When asked about the various types of knights, Skitters said they have only one kind of knight, and the difference between them was individual choices by the respective knight and the method of combat it preferences, oftentimes leading from which of the trooper class it was before the metamorphosis into a knight, with the champion knight being born on planet and acting as a balancing force between the 2 extremes of its kin. So for ease of catalogs, I will be classifying the knights into 3 categories followed by an explanation of the difference in bioweapons they use. The first classification of Vor knights I will be referring to is the Breacher. The Breacher knight is often seen sporting melee weapons and will have far thicker armor than its counterparts. It has been documented as leading the warrior or footmen class of troopers and as a very first into the fray style of command, often leading warrior assaults or anchoring footmen lines. However, some Breachers have been found with small-size ranged weapons, such as but not limited to the Bile Sprayer, Spine Launcher, and Bioflamer. The second classification is the Champion. The Champion seems heavily balanced between melee and ranged combat, sporting at most 1 weapon for close-range attacks and 2 ranged weapons, one of which will always be a long-range weapon. This class seems more focused on control of the flow of battle, and it will be careful in its approach to combat. The third class of knight I have dubbed Rangers. As the name may imply, this class of knight favors range combat and will grow weapons appropriate to this cause. Slightly smaller than other knights, it lacks the heavy armor and can be damaged by squad serve weapons such as 50 calibers or light munitions. However, its preference for range combat makes hitting it before it moves difficult. Sporting at the minimum a heavy spitter cannon similar in nature to the spitter class of troopers, although far heavier with a greater rate of fire, it will unleash a hailstorm of living ammunition at its target before retreating behind footmen lines. Favoring hit-and-run tactics against high-value targets, this class of knight has caused far too many losses in the pursuit of its prey. As for the bioweapons I have found among the hundreds of knights I had the displeasure of investigating, I have only found a total of 7 weapons and 1 augmentation for defensive action, 2 meant for close quarters, 3 for close to medium range, and 2 for long-range attacks. I will however start with the only defensive augmentation the knights use. The bone shield may sound impractical at first, however, the durability of this 7-foot by 6-foot shield should not be underestimated, capable of shrugging off most infantry weapons' fire, and even deflecting the round of our main battle tank if angled. This shield is an unmistakable boost to the knight's already impressive defensive capabilities. Made of an interlocking series of layers of carapace and a bioorganic crystal lattice, this shield seems to be capable of self-repair in the field provided the knight has an intake of nutrients. The lasher braid, as it is called by our soldiers, is a terrifying weapon and is the first of 2 melee weapons knights utilize. Composed of at least 10 tendrils with barbed ends, the lasher braid can act as a heavy flail or as a 10-strand whip. When in its flail mode, the 10 tendrils coil around themselves and ball on the end to form a flail with a 6-foot reach, When uncoiled into its whip configuration, the lasher braid has a reach of 30 feet with its barbed ends hooking targets and pulling them closer. If reports are accurate, these tendrils move on their own and try to catch as many prey as possible to drag them to the knight. The second melee weapon used by the knights is called a devil's hand by our soldiers, and after an extensive series of tests, I am inclined to agree to such a name. The devil's hand is a functional hand of 4 thick fingers ending in bone-hooked talons. The reason for such a fearsome name is the constant flow of the corrosive and poisonous venom it is coated in. A single drop, knocked out of a container by a lab hand, nearly ate its way through the station and vented my lab into the void. The venom, however, seems to have a few seconds of activity before it becomes inert. Unfortunately, it is more than enough time for it to cause reversible damage to our soldiers that are even scratched by it. The bile sprayer and bioflamer are physically and functional identical, with the only difference being in the external sac the weapons are attached to. The bile sprayer works in an identical manner to the bile thrower's weapon, while in a reduced size comparable to pistols, with a small membrane at the nozzle to control if the bile is released in a line or in a wide spray over a short area. The bioflamer functions like an organic flamethrower. The odd function of the bioflamer comes in the form of its fuel, rather a single fuel source that is ignited. The fuel used by the Vor are 2 compounds they hold in separate bladder and the sac on the back knight. The 2 chemicals are still under testing and analysis, however when combined they ignite when exposed to oxygen. The spine thrower is the last of the short to medium weapon. Resembling an organic pistol, the spine thrower launches spines that are a foot long and 4 inches across the flat of the spine. These spines are razor sharp and can easily cut through Kevlar. However, the lethality of this weapon comes in with what happens as the spine travels through the target. The spine quickly breaks apart in small plates, then quickly loses their velocity and leaves a trail of destruction. The next weapon on the list is the heavy spitter cannon. Similar in Desi in nature as the spitter rifle used by the Vor spitter, the heavy spitter cannon used a quad-barrel system to launch the living ammunition of the weapon at far greater rates of fire comparable to Gatling cannons. While not designed to be used in melee, it is large and heavy enough to be used like an improvised club to effect. Coupled with knight's size and strength, blows from such attacks are more than enough to crush our bones. The last weapon in the knight's arsenal is a weapon the soldiers have called a biorailgun, and while at first glance that apparently is the case, the truth of the weapon is far more simple yet equally effective. The snap cannon is a surprisingly complex yet simple weapon and seems to be the premier anti-tank weapon of the Vor. It utilizes a tightly packed collection of tendons with incredibly flexible and while also having superbly high tensile strength. Working like an organic ballista on steroids, the snap cannon accelerates its munitions to just short of the speed of sound. Its extreme penetration and killing potential comes from its choice of ammo. Like the spitter weapons, the snap cannon fires a larva at its target. The larva itself is encased in a crystal lattice that allows for it to penetrate the armor of our main battle tank. How this crystal lattice breaks apart short after penetration, at which point the larva already hold all the compounds it requires for self-implosion are immediately used. This larva, however, is larger than the ones used by spitter weapons, so the resulting explosion is equal to 500 pounds of dynamite.